title of the talk today is Ramana Maharshi embodied? Is embodiment important for enlightenment, or is it just Western ideas? I feel like I have talked about this before. Or maybe I've done a talk with a similar name, you know, after like 14 years. Yeah, I think it maybe it's 14 years of speaking. You kind of talked about everything. Yes, this is quite a controversial topic, and I hope I can do it justice. Because, yeah, I really respect and love Ramana Maharshi, and equally, I really respect all the modern new teachers coming through speaking about embodiment. Yeah, and I also understand that it's more of a feminine perspective. So yeah, it's a new perspective that women have contributed a lot to. Okay, so let's see if I can do it justice. I have a stuck earring amongst my technical stuff. Let's see what comes. So first of all, I think I want to speak about what non-duality actually is before I start bringing in Ramana Maharshi. So yeah, we'll start there. So non-duality, like I've said thousands of times, isn't a certified event. Ramesh Polsaka, my teacher, used to always say this. It's not a certified event. I was very proud of this assertion. So what that means is that there's lots of different interpretations of what enlightenment is. It's not like running 100 meters and you have to run it by like 20 seconds or something to qualify. Yeah, you can't really mark it and judge it and get everyone to agree on it. It's not like a running a race that is very measurable. It is an unmeasurable thing. And part of the reason why it's unmeasurable is that everybody has different ideas about what it is, and everyone has different experiences for what enlightenment is, which is kind of crazy. You think we'd all come together and be like, let's just like have one enlightenment and agree that that is what the word enlightenment means. Everyone's experience is so different. You know, talking about enlightenment is a little bit like talking about, you know, eating or describing food or something, like the sensation of describing food, of eating food. It's an impossibility to get everyone to match on that. And enlightenment is the same thing. It's such a personal thing. You know, if we had like a contest, like everyone had to describe a food, like the taste of a food without saying what it is, and then people had to listen and guess what food that was, you know, I think it would just be such a different thing for everybody. And yeah, this is the same for enlightenment. So what is enlightenment in my terminology? I'm just going to go and make sure that it mutes everyone as they enter the Zoom room. One moment. It's really lovely to see lots of familiar faces in the Zoom room. Mute upon entry. Oh, it is. Yeah. It's just an accident. Yeah, so what I mean by enlightenment, I tend to not use that word, but if I'm going to use that word today in the talk title, what I mean by that word is, I suppose, like the end of the separate self, or what speakers mean by the end of the separate self. Or what people describe as the end of the separate self. And Tony Parsons, he used to call it an energetic expansion, which totally made sense to me after this shift happened here. It felt like it was the teaching or the words that made the most sense, because it felt like I was contracted inside my body, and then it felt like my personal consciousness and my feeling of I am began to grow. It sounds so weird, but it was like they began to expand until they disappeared into everything. And then you could call it what is described by many traditional teachers as like just pure awareness, but awareness without a second. There's no subject, object, almost pure beingness, but not a separate beingness. So it's like the I am grew and became this impersonal I am beingness, and the consciousness grew and became impersonal consciousness awareness, and they merged together. And that is what that Chit Ananda is. So it's like they fell back in love and they became one, this present aware beingness, which is all things and no things, and it's not aware of, it's not separate. And what came back was there did come back personal consciousness and a feeling of I am, but they came back as like a shadow, as like a ghost. So what happened was it now feels like my essence is everywhere and nowhere, but yet there is a looking through this body-mind mechanism. And that personal consciousness and that feeling of I am comes and goes with a intensity dependent on how much it's needed for functioning. When there was no personal consciousness or no I am, there was an inability to really function. So just sitting in silence, very basic functioning could happen, but nothing complex. Speaking felt too complex. Like crossing road was way too complex. It was in Bali at the time, and crossing the road, that was not possible without personal consciousness. It was like, how could I tell where I was? I needed some form of reference point. And then as these cars whizzing by, it felt really, possible. And when this Satchitananda happens, there's often lots of experiences of samadhi, where the whole world disappears, so not only the personal consciousness and the I am sense, but also in the body-mind, but the whole world. And yeah, so there's different things to say on that. It begins to get complicated. So basically, what I mean by enlightenment in human form is this end of separation. So your consciousness, your personal consciousness and I amness expands into everything else. And there is no longer identification with the personal consciousness or the personal feeling of beingness. They appear in spaciousness. They are not an experience in any way. So they come and go, those personal senses, but they're not an experiencer in any way, and they're not fixed, they're not you. They're there as a functioning. Yeah. So the awakening, so enlightenment is not being in samadhi all the time. It's not being in the absolute all the time. It's this ability to, so enlightenment in the human form, this ability to function through the body-mind mechanism. And the body-mind mechanism feels like it's on the precipice between nothing and everything, between fullness and emptiness. And then Nisargadatta's quote is, and in between my life unfolds. So in between there is this functioning human, but the human isn't the center of the world anymore. Everything, love, bliss, freedom is. And this person comes and goes with practicality. So it's not staying in samadhi the whole time, like staying in the absolute, where there's absolutely no world, no personal consciousness, like heaven on earth, you could call it. It's and then it's not also the opposite end. The opposite end is complete identification with the person. So you're coming to something in between where the person, the character appears in the experience and it looks through this body, but this body is no longer the experiencer. The experiencer is this pure awareness. And really, I think that's what I've always felt embodiment is this coming back to this precipice between life and death, between there being a character in order to perform human duties, but that character being extremely empty. So you're kind of like on the verge between no thing and everything. So you're kind of alive and not alive. That sounds weird. Right? Yeah. I heard Ramana Krishna and many other teachers like describe it like that to stay in the body and stay alive, they have to have a desire remaining. So there's a tradition in India that if you fully wake up, you go into nirvana, which is beyond enlightenment, and that is when the body dies. So you leave the body. So in order to, once the awakening happens, or this enlightenment happens, then there has to be some form of desire to stay in the body. So Ramana Krishna is known for being greedy, like he liked food. And he said to his wife, because she was embarrassed by him being greedy, she was like, he's enlightened and look how greedy he is. And he said, as soon as I am not interested in food anymore, I will die 3 days later. And that's actually what happened to him. The time he stopped being interested in food, he died 3 days later. And what I feel like that means is that there has to be a desire in order to keep that awareness, or not even keep the awareness, but to keep the body alive. Like so vague interest in life. There's to be a vague interest in this dream, and something in this dream. So other teachers, they describe like this bodhisattva attitude, and that is the desire to come back, to return to the body and return to life in order to save other beings. Yes, there's all different types of this, and so embodiment to me is the ability to be in the world but not of it. So there is a character appearing, there is enough personal consciousness and enough of a feeling of I am in order for action to take place. But it's very thin. And the thinness of it is there's very little interest in it. There's very little interest in that. So freedom, there is much more interested in freedom, in who you truly are, and resting as what you truly are, than the human world and what all the human world has to offer. So it's like you're sitting on the edge of the human world. Everyone else is very interested in the human world, like trying to get all their needs and their wants and everything satisfied. And the enlightened one is very uninterested in it. But yet there is enough to keep them here. And the reason that they're so uninterested in it is because the other humans are looking for freedom in the human story and in time and space and in the world, whereas the enlightened one is absolutely free, is contented in self. So they're not interested in playing all those games anymore, or many of those games anymore. But I feel like there has to be attachment to some of them, otherwise the body would be let go of. And that's what a lot of the scriptures and teachings teach. So Ramana, and like if we just take Ramana for an example, and I hope I can do this justice because I really respect Ramana, and I suspect a lot of people that are listening do as well, because he's kind of such an important figure of bringing non-duality to the West. And he didn't bring it to the West, but his students did. Like he had such an impact in the modern teaching of non-duality. So with Ramana, what I feel like happened is he had this absolute awakening, and it was so deep and so pure. It was at the age of 16. And it was so deep and so pure. He spent many years like basking in the samadhi and in not really engaging in the human world. So it's almost like he was like very close to the death part, you know, so it's like the human form is on the precipice between nothing and everything. And he was very close to the nothing part for a very long time. And he had very little desire or interest in life, but there was enough. He stayed alive, he didn't die, people helped him. Other people kept him alive for periods. And there must have been something there which also then engaged. It might have been to help other people. So then in his latter life, he came back and he taught. And he was more functional, but still spending many, many hours in samadhi and in silence. He didn't speak so much and lived a very, very simple life, did not live a complex life. There was very little going on there except teaching, eating, and samadhi and silence, and communicating this. So I think he was embodied? I think latterly, yeah. Otherwise he would have died. So latterly there was some interest in the world again. There was something that came, there was some message that came, or some urge that came. Hmm. I feel like his body had very little to no seeking patterns left. So what happens for a lot of people is that after that shift is that the body purifies, and that is an endless purification in the end until the world stops appearing anymore. But he had very little purification left to do on the body. And that is about releasing seeking energies from the body and releasing old tendencies, old ways of thinking. Some people, after this going to samadhi, when they come back to life, they have to do a lot of that. And when they're doing a lot of that, they're very much in the person again. So often they very much come back to being a person, and there is seeking there again. But that is a process of releasing stuff. And then it gets less and less and less that you have to do. So then you really sit on the precipice between nothing and everything. But the body will still purify itself more and more and more and get less seeking patterns and less karmas. And when the old seeking patterns are coming up, sometimes you have to go back into seeking or back into the human world, like more attachment and involvement in the human world in order to release these old stories. Sometimes old characters, old habits, old ways of being present themselves in the world and sort of fish you back in to allow that energy out of the body. I feel though that Ramana Maharshi and Ananda Mahima, that they were really at the end in the sense of they most probably spent many lifetimes as sages, and there's very little seeking patterns left in their bodies, very little things to work out. What I feel happens in modern teaching is that people that have had an awakening and then they go back into life, so they're going back into the personality to work out the seeking patterns. So they're releasing, seeking and shadow stuff. And then they look at people like Ramana Maharshi and other teachers, and then they accuse or think that they're not embodied because they don't speak about or they don't look like all the shadow work that they've done or that they're doing. And sometimes it might be an insecurity from that teacher. It might not be a truth. It might be an old seeking pattern that comes up, and then they accuse these teachers of being like that because they feel embarrassed or ashamed that they're a teacher and that they've got this seeking stuff coming up that Ramana never spoke about. And it's not always that. It's sometimes also that's what they think because that's what their experience is. So because their experience is that their body is still detoxing lots of things, they turn around and then accuse teachers of like Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta, Ananda Mahima of not being embodied because they think they haven't done that work. Whereas I feel like they were most probably born into this life with very, very little stuff left. Like, so there isn't the work to be done there. And it sometimes comes, I think, from insecurities of other teachers, because the other teachers feel ashamed when they hear like how advanced these teachers are. And that is an old seeking pattern in them, and they listen to these teachers that sound like really perfectly awakened beings, and they're like, oh, well, I'm not like that all the time. And then they get that into their teaching modality, and that becomes a thing. And it can also sometimes come from just students as well, like not looking at the perfection of these teachers and then thinking I can never live up to that. So then there can also be accusing of them not being embodied and having gone through their shadow work. The reason why I feel like they've done their shadow work, not done it in this life, maybe in last lives, and the reason I think that is because of the way they describe the absolute and how close it is to them. If you've, like, so when the person is experiencing lots of love and bliss, this means that they're very close to this precipice between nothing and everything. They're very close. There's very thin I am there in personal consciousness. So it's like the I am and the personal consciousness is very, very thin, like ghost-like. So what you're experiencing is this Sat Chit Ananda, this perfect, brilliant love. Consciousness meeting beingness, and then Ananda being bliss. And so when the teachers are describing that, and also when they speak with a certain energy, you can hear it coming through them. And that they are spending what seems like all their teaching time there, like with this very little sense of self there, very little attachment to this world there. And if they were going through like processing of the shadow, that would be coming and going. As the shadow came up, the bliss and the love would become more veiled. And so therefore their teachings would reflect that, because you're only going to teach and speak what you're feeling in that moment. Whereas Nanda Mahima, Nisargadatta Maharaj, Ramana Maharshi are always including that in their teachings. This love, this bliss, this freedom, this stillness. So my feeling towards them is that they are really in the precipice between nothing and everything. And that can only happen if they've done the embodiment stuff, if they've done the shadow stuff, if they've burnt away that karma. If they hadn't burnt away that karma, they would be more in the human world, and there would be old seeking patterns burning out, and they would be feeling the discomfort of that, and they wouldn't be talking about love and bliss, unless they are sociopaths. And that would, like they're purposely lying in the moment, but that I don't think that's true at all, because when I listen to them, I really feel this like immense stillness, and I really don't think that's absolutely not what they are. Yeah. So just to be clear about me, as where I stand on that is I can have old seeking patterns come up, but it's less and less as the years go on, less and less and less. So this is why I feel like I can judge it now, after 14 years of teaching, I can, and can understand that. Yeah. I did a lot of work beforehand, like a lot of karma was burnt away beforehand. And then also as a child, I think I was born into this life very open already. So afterwards, there was still seeking patterns and old karmas that came up, but even they never really drew me far into that, that was, yeah. Even though there were some really painful ones, it wasn't. I never really felt like I went totally back into the human world. So yes, I 100% think that Ramana Maharshi is embodying this subject. I think if he was just hanging out in the absolute in order to avoid things, it would be cold and he wouldn't be speaking about love. The same with Ananda Mahima, and the same with Nisargadatta Maharaj. And I feel like they would be thrust into the fire. Life, if there was stuff there, life would bring it up in some way. And that would reflect in their teachings. Their teachings would change. They wouldn't consistently be speaking about this subject, they would change dependent on that seeking, burning energy that was coming up. Like, obviously they change the way they speak over the years, that's natural, but they keep coming back to this message of stillness is the truth. And the teacher's burning loads of old samskaras, then they'll go into all these deviations. So yes, just to say one more time, 100%, I think they're embodied and enlightened. And I think that they're the most advanced beings that there's been on the planet in long times. In long time. Okay, so if anyone's got any questions, you can put your hand up. I think we got some written questions.